In 1981, I sat across from a man in a small room in East Berlin. He was a diplomat, at least that's what his papers said. He was well-dressed, calm, polite. He smiled when I offered him tea. He crossed his legs and leaned back in his chair like we were two old friends catching up over lunch. And for the first 40 minutes of our conversation, he lied to me about everything. His name, his reason for being in Berlin, his contacts, his schedule for the previous 2 weeks. Everything. He was good, very good. He had clearly been trained by a Western intelligence service. His story was consistent. His body language was relaxed. His eye contact was steady. He didn't fidget. He didn't stutter. He didn't look away when I asked him direct questions. By every conventional measure, he appeared to be telling the truth. But he wasn't. And I knew he wasn't. Not because of some magical sixth sense. Not because of a gut feeling. I knew because I had been trained to read people at a level that most human beings don't even know exists. And in this video, I'm going to teach you some of what I learned. I served in the KGB for over 20 years. My name doesn't matter for this video. What matters is what I was taught. In the Committee for State Security, we didn't just learn to gather intelligence. We didn't just learn surveillance and tradecraft and document analysis. We learned something far more fundamental than any of that. We learned to read human beings, to look at a person sitting across from you and understand what they're really thinking, what they're really feeling, what they're hiding, what they're afraid of, what they want you to believe versus what is actually true. This was considered the most important skill an officer could possess, more important than languages, more important than weapons training, more important than anything technical. Because at the end of the day, every operation comes down to people. And if you can't read people, you can't do anything else. Let me start with the most basic principle, the one they taught us on the very first day of our training in human psychology. People don't lie with their words, they lie with their effort. Let me explain what that means. When someone is telling you the truth, they don't think about it. The information flows naturally. They might stumble over a word, they might correct themselves, they might say something out of order and then go back and fix it. Truth is messy. Truth is imperfect. Truth sounds like a real person talking about a real experience. But when someone is lying, they are constructing something. They are building a story in real time. And that construction requires effort, mental effort, and that effort leaks out. Not in the words themselves. The words can be perfect. The story can be airtight. But the effort of maintaining the lie shows up in places the liar doesn't control. Their breathing changes. Their blink rate increases. The muscles around their eyes tighten in ways that are almost invisible, but absolutely measurable if you know what to look for. Their speech becomes slightly more formal than it needs to be. They use fewer contractions. They repeat your question back to you before answering it because they need a few extra seconds to construct their response. These are not dramatic tells. These are not the things you see in movies where the guilty person starts sweating and looking at the floor. Real deception is subtle, and detecting it requires training and practice. Here's the second principle: baseline behavior. This was drilled into us more than anything else. You cannot read someone if you don't know what normal looks like for them. Every person has a baseline, a default way of sitting, a default way of speaking, a default rhythm to their gestures. Some people talk with their hands constantly. Some people are completely still. Some people maintain strong eye contact naturally. Some people look away when they think. None of these behaviors by themselves mean anything. A person looking away doesn't mean they're lying. It might just mean that's how they process information. A person crossing their arms doesn't mean they're defensive. They might just be cold or comfortable. The behavior only becomes meaningful when it deviates from that person's baseline. So the first thing we were taught to do in any interaction was spend time establishing the baseline. Before any important question, before any confrontation, before anything that matters. You spend time in casual conversation. You ask easy questions. Questions you already know the answers to. What is your name? Where are you from? How was your trip? What did you have for breakfast? You don't care about the answers. You care about how they answer. How do they sit when they're comfortable? How do they gesture when they're telling the truth about something mundane? What does their voice sound like when there's no pressure? What is their natural blink rate? Their natural breathing rhythm? their natural level of eye contact. You are building a mental map of this person's normal behavior. And once you have that map, any deviation from it becomes a signal that something has changed, that the emotional temperature has shifted, that the truth has been replaced by something else. I'll give you a real example from my work. I once spent 3 hours with a man who was suspected of passing information to a foreign government. For the first hour, we talked about nothing important: his family, his hobbies, his opinions about football. He was animated. He used his hands a lot. He smiled easily. He leaned forward when he talked about things he was passionate about. That was his baseline. Warm, expressive, open. Then I casually shifted the conversation toward his work, his recent trip abroad, his contacts at a certain embassy. And something changed. It was almost imperceptible. His hands went still. They rested on his thighs. His posture straightened. His voice didn't change in pitch or volume, but his sentences became shorter, more precise. He was choosing his words. And most importantly, he stopped leaning forward. He settled back in his chair. He was putting distance between us. Physical distance. Not because he was trained to do that. He wasn't a professional. He was a civilian. He did it instinctively. His body was pulling away from the source of danger, from the topic that made him vulnerable. If I hadn't established the baseline, that shift would have been invisible. But against the backdrop of an hour of relaxed, animated conversation, it was like watching a light switch turn off. Third principle: eyes. Now I need to be careful here because there is a lot of nonsense about eye movements and lying. Popular culture will tell you that people look to the left when they remember something and to the right when they're constructing a lie, or the other way around. This is mostly rubbish. There is some basis in neurolinguistic programming research, but it's wildly oversimplified and unreliable when applied to individuals. Everyone's eye patterns are different. What we were actually taught about eyes in the KGB was something different and far more useful. We were taught to watch for pupil dilation. Your pupils are one of the few things in your body that you cannot consciously control. They dilate when you're interested, when you're aroused, when you're afraid, when you see something you recognize, when a topic hits close to home, and they constrict when you're repulsed or when you're shutting down emotionally. In an interrogation setting, we would watch a person's pupils while asking a series of questions. Most questions would be neutral, irrelevant, designed to keep the conversation flowing. But periodically, we would insert a loaded question, a question related to the actual intelligence we were seeking, and we would watch the eyes, not the direction they moved, the size of the pupils. A sudden dilation on a specific topic told us more than 10 minutes of verbal response ever could. You can try this in your own life. Next time you're having a conversation with someone and you want to know if a topic matters to them more than they're letting on, watch their pupils. It requires practice. It requires being close enough to see clearly. But once you learn to notice it, you can never unlearn it. It becomes automatic. Fourth principle: timing. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of reading people, and it was one of the things that separated our training from what I've seen in Western approaches. It's not just about what someone says or how they say it. It's about when they say it. The timing of a response reveals enormous amounts of information. A truthful person responds to simple questions quickly, without hesitation, because they're accessing a memory, not constructing an answer. How did you get here today? I drove. What did you have for lunch? A sandwich. No pause, no processing delay. The answer exists in their memory, and it comes out immediately. But when someone is lying, the timing shifts. There's a delay. Sometimes it's less than a second, but it's there. Because before they can give you the false answer, their brain has to do several things simultaneously. It has to suppress the true answer. It has to retrieve the prepared false answer or construct a new one. It has to evaluate whether the false answer is consistent with everything they've already said. And it has to deliver the answer in a way that sounds natural. All of this takes time, fractions of a second, but those fractions are detectable. We were trained to measure response times almost unconsciously. After enough practice, you develop an internal clock. You know how long a truthful answer should take for a given type of question. And when the answer takes longer, you notice. Not always because the person is lying. Sometimes they're genuinely thinking. Sometimes the question is complex, but in the context of a series of simple, direct questions, a timing anomaly on one specific question is a signal worth following. There's another aspect of timing that most people miss entirely: emotional timing. When someone receives genuinely surprising news, their emotional reaction is instantaneous. The surprise hits their face before they have time to think about it. Shock, joy, anger, fear. These expressions flash across the face in a fraction of a second. They're called microexpressions, and they're almost impossible to fake. But when someone is pretending to be surprised, the emotional reaction comes after a tiny delay, because they have to decide to look surprised and then produce the expression. That decision gap is the tell. It might be a quarter of a second, but it's there. And once you know to look for it, you see it everywhere. In business meetings, in personal relationships, in negotiations. Whenever someone says something like, "Oh, I had no idea," or "Wow, that's terrible," and the emotion arrives just a beat too late, you know the surprise was manufactured. They already knew. Fifth principle: contradictions between channels. This is where it all comes together. Human communication happens across multiple channels simultaneously. Words are one channel, tone of voice is another, facial expression is another, body posture, hand gestures, breathing, eye behavior, foot movement. When someone is being truthful, all of these channels are aligned. They're telling the same story. The words say, "I'm happy." The voice sounds happy. The face looks happy. The body is open and relaxed. Everything matches. But when someone is lying, the channels start to contradict each other. The words say one thing, but the body says another. And the reason for this is simple. A person can only consciously control one or two channels at a time. They can control their words. They can probably control their face to some degree. But they cannot simultaneously control their words and their face and their voice and their posture and their hands and their feet and their breathing. Something will leak. Something always leaks. In the KGB, we were trained to watch the channels that people control the least. The lower body, the feet, the hands when the person isn't thinking about them, the micro movements of the face that last less than a quarter of a second, the voice when it's between sentences. These are the unguarded moments. The moments when the truth escapes. I remember interrogating a woman in the late 80s who was suspected of working as a courier. She was brilliant, truly one of the most skilled liars I have encountered in my entire career. Her verbal performance was flawless. Her story was internally consistent down to the smallest detail. Her face was calm and open. She maintained eye contact without staring, which is itself a skill that most amateur liars get wrong. They either avoid eye contact completely, or they overcompensate and stare at you without blinking, which is equally suspicious. She did neither. She looked at me naturally. She even produced tears at the appropriate moments when I applied pressure about her family and the consequences of what she was accused of. On every conscious level, she appeared to be telling the truth. I almost believed her. Almost. But her feet told a different story. She was wearing flat shoes, and throughout the entire conversation, her right foot was tapping against the floor. Not dramatically, not like a nervous habit that anyone in the room would notice. Just a small, rhythmic movement, barely audible. And every single time I asked a question that was close to the actual operation she was involved in, the tapping would stop. Completely. Her foot would freeze mid-motion. And then, when the topic moved to something safe, it would resume. She didn't know she was doing it. I'm certain of that. She had prepared everything else. Her words, her expressions, her tears, her breathing. But she forgot about her feet. Most people do. Your feet are the farthest point from your brain. They are the part of your body you are least conscious of in any given moment. And because of that, they are often the most honest part of you. I have used this principle hundreds of times since then, in formal interrogations and in casual conversations. Watch the feet. Watch the legs. Watch the lower body. That's where the truth lives when everything above the waist has been rehearsed. Let me tell you how you can apply all of this in your everyday life, because I know what some of you are thinking. This is interesting, but I don't interrogate spies for a living. I sit in meetings. I talk to my family. I negotiate with my boss. How does any of this help me? It helps you more than you realize. Think about the last time you were in a meeting at work and someone told you a project was on track. Did you watch their body language when they said it? Did you notice if their posture changed? If their timing was off? If they avoided certain details? Think about the last time someone told you they were fine when you asked how they were doing. Did you notice if the word fine came out too quickly, too flatly? If their face didn't match the word? Think about the last time you were negotiating something important, a salary, a contract, a purchase. Did you pay attention to the other person's baseline? Did you notice when their behavior shifted? Did you use silence to see what would happen? Most people don't do any of this because they've never been taught. They take words at face value. They accept what people say as what people mean. And then they're surprised when they discover the truth was different from what they were told. You don't have to be surprised anymore, not if you practice. Sixth principle, what people don't say. This is something that took me years to fully appreciate. In the beginning of my career, I was focused on what people said, on analyzing their words and their body language when they spoke. But some of the most valuable intelligence I ever gathered came from what people didn't say. Omissions, gaps, topics they steered around, questions they answered with different questions, stories that had suspicious holes in them. When you ask someone about their week and they give you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, but skip Thursday, that gap is more valuable than everything else they told you combined. Because it means Thursday contains something they don't want you to know about. They might not even realize they skipped it. The omission might be completely unconscious, but the absence tells you exactly where to look. We had a technique in the KGB that we used regularly. We would ask someone to tell us about a period of time, a week, a trip, a project, and we would let them talk. We wouldn't interrupt. We wouldn't ask follow-up questions. We would just let the narrative flow, and then we would map it. We would create a timeline of everything they mentioned, and then we would look for the gaps, the hours that weren't accounted for, the days that were glossed over, the people who were mentioned once and then never again. Those gaps became the focus of our next round of questions. And more often than not, those gaps contained exactly what we were looking for. Seventh and final principle, the most important thing I can tell you. And this is something that goes beyond technique, beyond training, beyond any specific skill. To truly read people, you have to learn to be silent. You have to learn to be comfortable with silence. Most people are terrible at this. Most people fill silence with words, with noise, with unnecessary questions and comments and reactions. They can't stand an empty pause in a conversation, and that impulse destroys their ability to read the other person. Because when you're talking, you're not observing. When you're filling silence, you're giving the other person a break. You're letting them rest. You're doing their work for them. In the KGB, we were taught to use silence as a tool, to ask a question, to receive an answer, and then to say nothing. Just sit. Just look at them, comfortably, calmly, without any urgency, and wait. Most people cannot tolerate that silence for more than 8 to 10 seconds. And what they do in that silence is incredibly revealing. Some people start to explain themselves further even though you didn't ask them to. That means they feel their answer was insufficient. They're worried it wasn't convincing. Some people ask you a question in return, trying to shift the dynamic. That means they want to escape the spotlight. Some people laugh nervously. Some people look at the floor. Some people start fidgeting with their hands or their phone or their clothing. And some people, very rare people, sit in the silence comfortably and wait for you to speak. Those are either the most honest people in the room or the most dangerous. In either case, they deserve your full attention. That man in East Berlin, the diplomat who lied to me for 40 minutes. Do you want to know how I finally broke through his cover? It wasn't a clever question. It wasn't a piece of evidence I confronted him with. It wasn't a trick. I simply stopped talking. After 40 minutes of polite conversation, I asked him one specific question about a meeting he attended at a certain address on a certain date. He gave me a smooth, rehearsed answer, and then I said nothing. I just looked at him. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. His smile faded first. Then his posture shifted. His hands, which had been resting casually on the arms of his chair, moved to his lap. His breathing changed. He swallowed twice. And then he started talking again, voluntarily, adding details I never asked for, explaining things that didn't need explanation, justifying his presence at that meeting with additional context that contradicted what he'd said 15 minutes earlier. Silence did what 40 minutes of conversation couldn't. It created a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. People will fill it, and what they fill it with is almost always the truth they've been hiding. Let me give you a summary of what I've covered. 7 principles. Effort over words, because lies require construction, and that construction leaks out in ways the liar doesn't control. Baseline behavior, because nothing means anything without a point of comparison. Pupil dilation, because it's the one thing the human body cannot consciously manipulate. Timing, because lies take longer to produce than truths. Channel contradictions, because a person can only consciously control so many signals at once, and the unguarded channels tell the real story. Omissions, because what people don't say is often more important than what they do say. And silence, because it is the most powerful interrogation tool ever invented, and it requires nothing except the discipline to use it. These 7 principles were the foundation of everything I did in over 20 years of service. They work in an interrogation room. They work in a business meeting. They work at a dinner table. They work with your colleagues and your neighbors and your family. Not because I want you to treat everyone like a suspect, but because understanding how people actually communicate, as opposed to how they think they communicate, gives you an enormous advantage in every interaction you will ever have. You will see things others miss. You will understand things others don't. And you will know when someone is not being honest with you long before they realize you know. I want to end with one thought. Reading people is a skill. Like any skill, it requires practice. You don't become fluent overnight. Start with baseline observation. Next time you're in a conversation with someone you trust, spend the first few minutes just watching. How do they sit? How do they gesture? What's their natural eye contact like? Build that mental map. And then, over time, start looking for deviations. Start noticing timing. Start paying attention to what's not being said. Start using silence and watching what happens. It will feel strange at first. You will be bad at it. That's normal. I was bad at it too when I started. Everyone is. But after months and years of practice, it becomes second nature. You stop thinking about it. You just see it. Like learning to read. At first, every letter requires effort. And then one day you look at a page and the meaning is just there. That's what reading people feels like when you've done it long enough. The meaning is just there, in their face, in their hands, in their silence. Thank you for watching. If you found this useful, please subscribe and hit the bell. I will be sharing more of what I learned over 20 years in the Committee for State Security. Things that most people don't know. Things that might change how you see the world and the people in it. Until next time.